in York Centre. As I do every year to mark Valentine's Day, this past week I visited the Sunshine Group, Earl Bale Senior Centre, Downsview Seniors Home, and St. Bernard Seniors residents to distribute roses to all of the residents. As always, the smile on their faces touched my heart. I want to thank them all for welcoming me so warmly. I also want to acknowledge and thank the directors, caregivers, volunteers of these homes and organizations for all the hard work they do to care for their seniors. We can best show our respect and gratitude to seniors by working hard to make sure our communities are places which older people can participate, find encouragement, acceptance, assistance, and services to continue to lead their lives with dignity. For all they have achieved throughout life and all they will accomplish, we owe them our deepest gratitude. To quote poet Robert Browning, "Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be."
The Honourable Member for Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to pay tribute to our nation's artists and cultural workers, many of whom call my riding of Parkdale High Park home. The arts and culture sector contributes $47.8 billion to the Canadian economy annually and strengthens communities by allowing us to share our stories and find new ways of understanding the world we live in. Sadly, under this government, artists are struggling to have their contributions respected. Conservative cuts to Heritage, the CBC, Telefilm, the National Film Board, and Library and Archives Canada will have a negative and lasting impact. And without a strategy for ensuring Canadian content is present in the digital realm, producers are missing key opportunities and Canadian stories and voices are being drowned out. New Democrats respect our artists and are committed to supporting them with stable funding for our national institutions, reversing the cuts to the CBC, and fostering continued growth in the cultural sector. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia.
Mr. Speaker, this month the Supreme Court made a historic decision in Carter versus Canada. The unanimous ruling to strike down the prohibition on physician-assisted death is a decision that the vast majority of Canadians support. I wish to congratulate organizations such as Dying with Dignity and the many other individuals, such as the Carter family, who brought this issue back to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has said that a competent adult should have more options at the end of life. Those options should be based on their own life experiences, ethics, morals, and religion. The Supreme Court ruling mirrors the spirit and the letter of my private members' bills on this issue. This Parliament and Canadians must respond to this new empowerment of the individual. This is not a partisan issue. We can discuss this issue with dignity, mutual respect, empathy, love, hope, and mercy.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Quadra.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in the House today to offer my congratulations to the Canadian-based charity Educating Girls of Rural China, their founder, Mrs. Tian Qing, her board, and to wish them all the best as they celebrate their 10th anniversary. Educating Girls of Rural China is dedicated to sponsoring the secondary and post-secondary education of financially challenged young women from rural Western China who would otherwise miss out. Since its establishment in 2005, EGRC has awarded hundreds of high school and university sponsorships to deserving young women. Through the help of its Canadian donors, EGRC has successfully sponsored 247 young women through to graduation and presently supports 265 women students enrolled in secondary or post-secondary institutions. As an enthusiastic supporter of education for girls, of women's economic and social equality, and of EGRC, I am delighted to see the continued success of this incredible organization. I believe I speak on behalf of all parliamentarians when I wish them the very best in their work to empower young women in rural China for many decades to come.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
Mr. Speaker, today I'm wearing yellow to honor a creative genius, the co-founder of Calgary's celebrated One Yellow Rabbit Theatre Company, Michael Green. Tragically, last week, Michael Green died in a car crash along with two other respected members of the artistic community just outside Regina. It was a tremendous loss, not only for Calgary, but for the nation. You know, Michael Green curated and produced Calgary 2012, which was the Cultural Capital of Canada extravaganza, and he was the fuse that lit an explosion of artistic creation. Over 1,200 people packed the Jack Singer to the rafters yesterday to praise Michael. You know, I remember just a couple of weeks ago, I joined Michael's parade along with a bagpiper, clowns on stilts, and dancers wearing horses' heads as we paraded through downtown Calgary, much to the surprise and delight of lunchgoers. He was absolutely fearless and fun. And he showed us the transformative power of art, Mr. Speaker. We're heartbroken over what we've lost, but we're grateful for what we've gained.
The honourable member for Scarborough Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, on February 6, I was delighted to welcome over 100 students and teachers from St. Maria Goretti Catholic School during their visit to Parliament Hill. I had the distinct privilege of bringing them into this chamber, to the very heart of our democracy and their parliament. I hope that they found the visit inspiring. Their organizing teacher, Mr. Raleigh Baran, who has organized trips to Ottawa with his students for the past decade, will be retiring at the end of this year. Mr. Baran is a teacher who strives to enshrine in his young students a sense of their civic duties, their rights, and their responsibilities. I believe it's important to recognize the contributions of Mr. Baran and teachers like him in educating and the development of our young citizens. They often work long hours with little recognition to ensure future generations are well equipped to succeed in our evolving world. Mr. Speaker, I call on all to applaud Mr. Raleigh Baran and teachers like him for their years of service and to express our best wishes to them when they take their well-deserved retirements at the end of the school year. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pickering Scarborough East.
Mr. Speaker, I am honoured to share with the members of this House the accomplishments of an outstanding constituent in my riding. Larry Noonan is a retired school principal, volunteer, historian, and the steward of the Altona Forest in Pickering, and the proponent and supporter of the Rouge National Urban Park. Larry Noonan has contributed to the City of Pickering and the City of Toronto environmental initiatives, served on park committees, and has been active in leading adult and youth groups and school classes into the Rouge Valley for both leisure and study activities. In celebration of the 50th anniversary of our national flag, our government decided to award this proud symbol to 50 Canadians and organizations who have contributed significantly to the well-being of our citizens, and Larry Noonan was one of them. I would like the members of this House to join me in congratulating Larry Noonan for his achievements and successes and wish him all the best for his future endeavors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Prince George Peace River.
Mr. Speaker, it was my honour to attend the opening ceremony of the 2015 Canada Winter Games last Friday and pay tribute to the athletes competing in my home riding in Prince George Peace River. 2015 has been proclaimed as the Year of Sport in Canada, and the Prince George 2015 Canada Winter Games are one of this year's signature events. We can all be proud of each one of the participants and of Canada's largest domestic multi-sport event, which brings athletes from 19 sports over a 2-week period and is a true testimony to the dedication and hard work of Canadian youth. We know when we embrace the power of sport and lead more active lives, we build healthier, stronger communities. I would also like to extend my gratitude to the coaches, mission, support staff, officials, game organizers, and of course, thousands of volunteers and parents who have supported these athletes throughout the years. Special thanks to Brian, Peter, and Andre of Pioneer Log Homes for the donation of the beautiful Canada Winter Games log cauldron. Please join me in congratulating all of those who are making Prince George 2015 Canada Winter Games a huge success.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Quebec. Mr. Speaker, it is an honour for me to rise in this House today, Shrove Tuesday. As you know, the past Rondelle tournaments are back in Quebec City, and for over 6 weeks, Adam, novice, and pre-novice players will face off in a unique atmosphere. 2,800 young hockey players and their families will fill the Gaëtan Duchesne Arena in the warm and wonderful Les Saules district. For Quebec City, the past Rondelle tournaments mean $500,000 of economic spin-offs for the region. I'd like to commend the exceptional work done by President Paul-André Rousseau, who received the Méritance Award of the Revue Sportive 2015. Thanks to these keen young players, their dedicated coaches, their parents who support them, and the spectators who cheer them on. And finally, to all the organizers and volunteers who make this possible. Come to Quebec City to encourage the next generation of hockey players and to allow them to live their passion. Thank you.
The honourable member for Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians support the tax relief our government has brought forward to date. Bringing in higher taxes and higher debt is not the path we believe Canadians want to be on. Bringing a carbon tax is not a way to deal with economic issues in our country. Canadians can't afford more of the NDP and Liberal risk tax HoC. Luckily for Yukoners, the Premier has come out condemning a carbon tax, saying it would hike taxes on Northerners and raise costs. A job-killing carbon tax is reckless. Mr. Speaker, our Conservative government is lowering taxes for families and putting more money back in their pockets. Keeping taxes low and creating jobs are essential to keeping this economy on the right track. We will never punish Canadians with job-killing carbon tax. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Mr. Speaker, while the Prime Minister accuses Radio-Canada CBC employees of all kinds of conspiracies, the government continues to slash funding of our public broadcaster. The Conservatives are continuing the gutting undertaken by the Liberals in the 1990s and endangering regional information, which would sometimes not exist without Radio-Canada. In Abitibi-Témiscamingue for the past 15 years, 2 daily broadcasts and a team of seasoned journalists have made sure that public information is available to Ville-Marie, Amos, La Sarre, Barotte, Rouyn-Noranda, Val-d'Or, and other villages. I would like to remind you that the NDP is the only party that has promised to reinstate adequate, stable, multi-year funding for CBC. And I am proud to inform you that hundreds of citizens from Abitibi-Témiscamingue will turn out this Saturday in Rouyn-Noranda to defend the relevance of our public broadcaster, which we so desperately need in our regions. Numerous artists will come to speak proudly of their attachment to CBC, and you can be sure that I'll be with them to have the voice of Abitibi-Témiscamingue heard.
The honourable member for Brandon Souris.
Thanks to our new family tax cut and enhanced child care benefit, 100% of families with children in Westman will be better off. Due to these measures, every parent in Canada will now receive just under $2,000 per child. But, Mr. Speaker, there is a stark difference between our plan and the Liberal and New Democrat plans. While we are directly supporting hard-working families, the opposition will take money away from families. While we are cutting taxes, the Liberal leader will raise taxes. And while our plan helps 100% of families with kids, the NDP plan helps only 10% of families. Mr. Speaker, our tax cut plan will benefit every family in Canada with children. That's over 4 million families. I am proud to be part of a government that is reducing taxes and putting more money back into the pockets of each and every Canadian family with children.
The honourable member for Ottawa-Vanier.
Mr. Speaker, since becoming the Liberal advocate for cooperatives, I've had the privilege of meeting many community leaders dedicated to the cooperative cause. One of the most dynamic of them was Mark Goldblatt, former Executive Director of the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada and founder and chair of the Funeral Cooperative of Ottawa. Mr. Goldblatt suddenly passed away on Wednesday, February 4th. Many will miss his sage advice, me included. A positive force for change in the co-op world, he also served as president of the Canadian Worker Cooperative Federation for 14 years. For the last 10 years of his life, he remained very active and developed 3 new housing cooperatives and 2 non-profit housing projects. A recipient of several awards, Mr. Goldblatt was an iconic figure of Canada's thriving cooperative community. His actions paved the way for future generations of co-op entrepreneurs. The memory of Mark Goldblatt and the impact he had lives on and will continue to do so for a long time yet. I want to thank his family for sharing him with us for so many years, and I want to thank Mark for his selfless dedication.
The honourable member for St. Catharines.
Mr. Speaker, Stats Canada has confirmed that middle-class families are better off under our Prime Minister than under the previous Liberal government. But the Liberal leader has no idea what it's like to be middle class. He's promised to reverse tax benefits for middle class families, but under our family tax cut and enhanced child care benefit, 100% of families with children will receive an average of over $1,100 a year. A single mother with 2 children earning $30,000 would benefit from an additional $1,500 a year, Mr. Speaker. We know that for the important decisions that affect the lives of children, the decision-making power should be with moms and dads, not with government, and certainly not with the Liberal leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Yesterday, during an interview, the Prime Minister said that Radio-Canada CBC employees hate conservative values. First, he's wrong. It's not most of journalists in Radio-Canada who hate the values of his party. It's the majority of Canadians. And also, he said that Quebecers voted for the NDP 10 times more often than for Conservatives. And also, on Sunday, the member for Calgary Centre shocked everyone by saying that the death of 3 journalists was less bad than the shuttering of Sun News. For the Conservatives, everything is either white or black. There are not 50 shades of grey. There are good media and bad media that criticize the government too much. We know that the Prime Minister wants the public broadcaster to be the Conservative Party's propaganda mouthpiece. He can take control of the board of directors and cut its budget, but when the NDP replaces this budget, we will reinstate the CBC's budget and ensure its independence. Honourable Member for Lotbinière de la Chaudière. Mr. Speaker, during Constituency Week, I had the pleasure of hearing from numerous families in Lotbinière de la Chaudière who were delighted with the new tax cuts and the benefits for families. All families in Quebec and across Canada will benefit to the tune of over $1,100 per year on average. Thanks to us, every parent will receive some $2,000 per child, but the Liberals and NDP would pay this to bureaucrats. Our plan helps 100% of families with children, but the NDP plan would not help them at all, and the Liberal leader wants to increase the taxes of ordinary Canadians. We will never let that happen, Mr. Speaker. Our Conservative government believes that Canadians should keep more of their money that they've worked so hard to earn, and with our family tax cut, we are proud to have achieved this goal. Thank you.
Oral questions, questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, from the outset, the Prime Minister has been refusing to tell Canadians the truth about our role in Iraq. Our troops were not supposed to be on the front line. They weren't supposed to be involved in combat, but of course we now know that they are. Now the Parliamentary Budget Officer says that the Conservatives, quote, appear to breach National Defence's legal obligations under the Parliament of Canada Act. In clear terms, they've broken the law, and it's because the Conservatives are refusing to tell the truth about the cost of the war in Iraq. Why does the Prime Minister keep hiding from Canadians the truth about his war in Iraq?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, the government has released the costs of the mission exactly as it said it would, $122 in incremental costs, $122 million additional dollars. But to this point in time, that's very clear, Mr. Speaker. I don't know how much clearer it could be. We know the reality is the NDP will hate even a cent spent on the Canadian military. But I can assure the House, Mr. Speaker, for this mission that we're ensuring not only that our personnel are well paid, but that they are well equipped, that they have the ordnance necessary to do their job. And I think all Canadians are very proud of the job they're doing fighting these wars.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is that the Prime Minister is constantly changing his story. He didn't tell the truth on sending our troops to the front lines. He didn't tell the truth about the cost of the war in Iraq. But today, it's the Parliamentary Budget Officer who is telling us what the truth is. And if the Prime Minister is so confident that this war is a good idea, why does he continue to refuse to tell Canadians the truth about the cost of this war? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have clearly told the truth on the cost of our mission with our international allies in Iraq. We told the truth about the combat mission in Iraq, and this is a mission to assist the troops, the Peshmerga, and I'm very happy to see that Canadians support this truth. It's only the NDP that hates the truth.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the public of Minister of Insecurity would not get balled up in definitions. This is reassuring because the Conservatives are unable to explain how peaceful demonstration would still be protected under C-51. The minister did not want to give a single example of the kind of activity that CSIS would be able to undertake to disrupt these kinds of threats. So can the Prime Minister tell us how far how CSIS can go under Bill C-51? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of measures in this bill, including the fact that promoting terrorism will become a crime. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think that the Canadian people think that this is necessary to protect our country. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Well, let's see. What else will become a crime in Canada?
Spying on, quote, interference with infrastructure and interference with economic or financial stability. The language is so broad that it would allow CSIS to investigate anyone who challenges the government's social, economic, or environmental policies. What's to stop this bill from being used to spy on the government's political enemies?
Mr. Speaker, we knew with the NDP it would be only a matter of a couple of weeks before we got into this kind of conspiracy theory. But that's what we come to expect from the black helicopter fleet over there. Mr. Speaker, of course, the reality is under the legislation, should CSIS find it necessary based on information about imminent terrorist activity in Canada, should they find it necessary to disrupt that, they, of course, have to go to a court to get court sanction for those actions.
I'm sure the Prime Minister will show us where the word imminent appears in that law.
But the problem, Mr. Speaker, is that the Prime Minister sees enemies everywhere. And now it is the employees of Radio-Canada that are in his sights. Yesterday he said, and I quote him, that the Radio-Canada journalists hate conservative values. The majority, he said, of these employees want to get rid of his government. But is it possible that the Prime Minister is wrong, and what he meant to say is that he's finally realized that the vast majority of Canadians want to get rid of his government? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we believe that a large majority of Quebecers agree with our government. The tax burden has been decreased. There are benefits for families. It's the fight against crime and terrorism. Rather than the taxes and what they would pay for red tape. And we have to fight against jihadists and criminals. So the orange wave in Quebec has turned, and Quebecers will get rid of them. The Honourable Member for Papineau. Mr. Speaker, I was astonished and disappointed yesterday to hear that the Prime Minister attacked the ethics and the professionalism of CBC and Radio-Canada journalists. Canadians are proud of their public broadcaster and their mission, its mission rather, to unite Canadians across the country. Will the Prime Minister apologize to the employees of CBC and Radio-Canada, as well as to the Canadians who support them? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I know very well that the Liberals and the NDP want to hike taxes and give all the benefits of our programs to unions and bureaucracies, and not to take seriously the fight against terrorists and crime and criminals. These are not Quebec values or Canadian values. They are our conservative values, and we'll continue to defend them. I think there was a problem in the translation.
In Ontario, the Prime Minister has run no ads promoting the life-saving benefits of vaccinations. He has, in fact, cut public health immunization budget by 23%. Will he stop his self-promoting partisan government ads and invest instead now in a campaign that encourages parents to vaccinate their kids?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The Minister of Health and other members of the government have been very clear on the fact that the Canadians should seek proper vaccines against measles and against a range of other illnesses. These vaccines have historically proven extremely effective in reducing and in some cases even eliminating certain types of previously debilitating ailments. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to make sure when we are responsible, the Canadians are aware of these options, not just in the health area, but all across areas of government.
The honourable member for Papineau.
Mr. Speaker, last week we learned that there were 10 cases of measles in La Naudière. We also note that the government is failing in its duty to inform parents of the importance of vaccinating their children. Moreover, Mr. Harper has reduced by 23% the honourable member for Papineau knows that he must use only titles and riding names and not proper names in the House. I apologize, Mr. Speaker. Moreover, the Prime Minister has reduced the immunization budget of the Public Health Agency by 23%. Will the Prime Minister put an end to his useless partisan advertising and immediately begin promoting vaccinations for children? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health always promotes the use of vaccination, and the history is very clear on the usefulness of vaccines to improve the health of our children and our families. And, Mr. Speaker, we encourage that at all times. As far as advertising is concerned, we have the responsibility of promoting our programs to the Canadian public, and will continue to do so. The Honourable Member for Alfred-Pellan. In its report, the RCMP states that the anti-petroleum movement, and that's their term, not mine, is a threat to Canada. No one here encourages nor tolerates violence, but this report clearly targets organizations that are environmental organizations. So under C-51, that is very, very strong language. Does the Minister consider that environmentalists are really a threat to the stability of the Canadian economy? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, our bill is clear. It targets people who commit terrorist acts. Now, the RCMP is also monitoring people that would commit terrorist acts. But I would encourage my colleague to look at Section 2 of the bill, which clearly says that peaceful protests and those kinds of dissident claims are not covered by the bill, so she may be reassured by that.
Speaker, Canadians are right to be concerned that the Conservatives are going too far with this bill. Yesterday, the minister failed to explain how the bill impacts legitimate dissent. So today, let's talk about another section. C-51 proposes a new criminal offence to advocate or promote terrorism in general. Canada already has strong laws that make it an offence to incite a terrorist act. Can the minister provide a single example showing that such a new offence is necessary?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we saw this weekend that Copenhagen and the world are in war, and at war with the jihadist international movement, Mr. Speaker. And our anti-terrorism bill is clear, Mr. Speaker. Our security agencies can only target those who pose a risk to Canada and not legitimate dissent. Mr. Speaker, the members should read the Section 2 of the bill, which clearly states that Canada any activity that undermines the security of Canada does not include lawful advocacy, protest, dissent, and artistic expression. Please read the bill, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Squamish.
The word lawful is a new insertion there, which seems to say that most dissent is something else other than lawful. So today the government failed to give us a single example of the new activities CSIS would be allowed to engage in to disrupt under C-51. And the minister still can't clearly explain the provisions of this bill that experts think will impact legitimate dissent and free speech. How can Canadians trust this government if they won't answer basic questions about what's in their bill with anything except talking points?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, we saw last week the NDP oppose the bill to fight against terrorism, and yesterday we saw them against measures to improve security on the Hill. They're not even able to say that the attack on October 22nd was a terrorist attack. So Canadians can count on our government to implement effective measures to protect Canada against the terrorist threat. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, in EI, it would seem like a new minister is not synonymous with a new approach. And indeed, after having drastically limited access to EI, the Conservatives are now asking officials to throw up roadblocks for the unemployed to avoid them receiving the benefits to which they are entitled. Officials who are, let's say, too helpful are even wrapped on the knuckles. It makes no sense. Rather than causing problems for the unemployed and officials, why do the Conservatives not tackle unemployment and job creation? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are working on reducing wait times for people waiting for benefits, and we have a situation now where more than half of the applicants receive their benefits within 20 days, but we're trying to create jobs and reduce taxes. So we're trying to leave more money in the pockets of businesses and Canadians to increase economic productivity and to ensure that people can work.
For London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, in December 2004, the member for Nepean Carleton told the House that it was, quote, not politicians who create jobs. It's an odd statement, given he's now the jobs minister. Fewer than 4 in 10 unemployed Canadians are now getting benefits. Now he's been given this new responsibility. What will the minister do to fix EI so that it actually works for unemployed Canadians? Or is that somebody else's job?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member illustrates the distinction between the two sides of the House. On that side, they believe in increasing taxes and increasing the burden on families and on employers so that politicians and bureaucrats can hoard all the money for themselves. On this side of the House, we believe in reducing taxes, which has created 1.2 million net new jobs. We've lifted hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty, including during the recession. And Canadians are better off. Our job record is the best out of all the G7 countries. Low taxes work.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
What nonsense, from job losses to EI to their failure to create childcare spaces.
Order. The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe has the floor. Members need to come to order. The Honourable Member.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I'm glad you reminded them of their manners. From job losses to EI to their failure to create childcare spaces, Conservative economic mismanagement is hurting ordinary Canadians. Labour force participation is at a 15-year low, and people like Ghislaine Mignon, who want to work but can't afford the high cost of childcare, are out of luck. Why won't the Conservatives adopt the NDP leader's plan for affordable childcare and ensure that all parents who want to work are given the opportunity to work?
State for Social
Mr.
Development.
Speaker, here's the difference between their plan and our plan. Our plan believes and gives power to parents, rural parents, parents who are not working 9 to 5, parents who are maybe using another family member to help look after their children, or parents who make a decision themselves to stay home and look after their children. Our plan gives money into the pockets of every single Canadian family with children. Their plan, Mr. Speaker, would help less than 10% of all Canadian families.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Lambert. Mr. Speaker, one thing is clear. The Conservatives are incapable of creating good jobs. Labour force participation in the country is at its lowest level, even if Canadians want to work. For parents with children, a single salary is no longer enough to pay for childcare. The NDP has a plan to help families and create affordable childcare services across the country. Why does the minister refuse to help Canadian families who want to both work and raise their children? The Honourable Minister of State.
We have failed to talk to parents from different areas in this country, rural Canadian families, families that are not working 9 to 5 jobs, families who have decided that one parent will stay home to look after the children. They are not considering any of those families when they talk about their childcare plan. Their plan would only help less than 10% of all Canadian families. Our plan helps every single Canadian family with children, puts money directly into their pockets.
For Parkdale High Park.
Well, what's clear, Mr. Speaker, is that the Conservatives can't be bothered to help ordinary Canadians, but they'll bend over backwards to help the well-off, even if it means turning a blind eye to tax evasion. Leaked documents show that more than 1,800 Canadians are holding secret Swiss bank accounts with HSBC, but there have been no charges of tax fraud or tax evasion. Why are the Conservatives using kid gloves on wealthy tax cheats while ordering public servants to deny EI benefits to the unemployed?
Great point. The Honourable Minister of National Revenue.
Our government has a very strong record dealing with tax evasion. Since 2006, the CRA has audited over 8,600 international tax cases, identifying over $5.6 billion in additional taxes that are being collected. Regarding the HSBC accounts, where non-compliance was expected, the CRA conducted hundreds of audits, which have led to over $21 million in taxes and penalties being reassessed. Furthermore, the CRA has received more than 250 voluntary disclosures. That's $123 million in previously undisclosed accounts.
The Honourable Member for Rivière du Nord. Mr. Speaker, while the HSBC Swiss bank scandal is rattling the entire world, here in Canada, the Conservatives are asleep at the switch, and yet we know that more than 1,800 individuals and Canadian businesses, amongst the wealthiest in our society, have secret bank accounts in Geneva, and often in order to avoid paying taxes here in Canada. Many well-known names have been made public by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. What is the minister waiting to act and to tighten the screws on these people? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, our government has a solid record in terms of international tax evasion.
Something about it, as I just said, and I'll give the numbers again because, frankly, they're quite impressive. With respect to the HSBC accounts where non-compliance was expected, the CRA conducted hundreds of audits. That's led to over $21 million in taxes and penalties being reassessed. The CRA has received more than 250 voluntary disclosures about HSBC accounts. That's $123 million in previously undisclosed documents.
The member for Toronto Centre.
Mr. Speaker, a recent Conference Board study shows that Canada's younger generations are earning less and receiving fewer pension benefits than their parents. Quote, young Canadians may have a lower lifetime earning potential than any generation before. There is no more dire indictment of a country's economic performance than the prospect that our future may be poorer than our past. Stale and misleading talking points, like the ones we've heard already today, won't deliver prosperity for this generation. So when will the government finally table a budget with a real plan for jobs and growth?
The Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, Canadians know that they're much better off with this Conservative government. Our government is focused on what matters most to Canadians, and that's jobs and the economy. Mr. Speaker, over 1.2 million net new jobs have been created since the recession. These jobs are overwhelmingly full-time and in the private sector. Both the IMF and the OECD forecast Canada to have one of the strongest growing G7 economies in the years ahead, Mr. Speaker. The future looks bright, and I know that young Canadians who are involved in skill development, Mr. Speaker, the future looks bright.
The Honourable Member for York West.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing that's more snarled than GTA traffic is this government's jumbled priorities when it comes to municipal infrastructure. Roads, sewers and bridges are vital job creation tools, but Conservatives have flushed over $750 million of infrastructure money into taxpayer-funded partisan ads. Roads are cracking, bridges are rusting, and the Conservatives are using infrastructure money to buy votes, not infrastructure, not steel, and not concrete. Does the minister agree that the only thing growing faster than GTA potholes is the Conservative addiction to lavish partisan ads?
The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, like you know, the New Building Canada plan is the longest and the biggest ever in this country. And we have supported, and we do that in respect of jurisdiction, too, Mr. Speaker, what is very important. We have invested more in infrastructure of this country than the former government, and for sure we will continue to do so. Since our government took office, Canada has consistently led G7 countries in total investment in infrastructure as percentage of GDP. It's quite a contrast with Liberals, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Mr. Speaker, it's all about priorities. Imagine, if you will, over $2 million for ministers to take pictures.
Order. The irony is that all these members yelling louder makes it impossible for the Speaker to hear the member. So perhaps if they stopped shouting that, the member would have to speak so loudly. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North has the floor.
Speaker, over $2 million tax dollars for pictures when ministers have their special events. They really need to learn how to take selfies, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you, hundreds of millions of political or tax dollars on political advertising. It is about priorities. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, a cutback from spending over $2 billion on infrastructure to $210 million last year, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Prime Minister is, why is he given up on valuable infrastructure expenditures? Think of the prairies, think of the needs of Calgary, Winnipeg, and other municipalities.
The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, if you talk about selfie, I think you just have to look in front of him. You can find a king of that. Oh, yeah. For sure. And he's talking about 2 million. I remember the 40 millions of sponsorship scandal still missing, Mr. Speaker. But we're investing in infrastructure of this country like never before.
Member for Châteauguay-Saint-Constant. While the Conservatives pour millions into the war in Iraq, they're letting our reservists wait almost 2 years for their severance pay. There are 2,754 cases in the backlog. It's unacceptable. Why doesn't the government have its priorities and resources in the right place in order to process these cases ASAP? The Honourable Minister of National Defence. Mr. Speaker, it's unacceptable to have such a big backlog, and that's why at the beginning of this month, the Department of National Defense directed staff to process these applications for benefits for reservists, and they will do so as quickly as possible. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, our soldiers and veterans deserve better. While the Conservatives are pouring millions into the war in Iraq, the soldiers and veterans are not getting their retirement benefits nor adequate health care. This government clearly has its priorities wrong. Why isn't the minister improving services to soldiers and veterans? What's he waiting for? The Honourable Minister of National Defence. Mr. Speaker, we are proud of our record, an increase of 27% in the Canadian Armed Forces. Modern tools to help them do their important work. And we care about our men and women in uniform. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, that the NDP would cut the budget for national defense. They do not support the mission of our soldiers in Iraq against the will of Canadians. We are there to work with the men and women in the Canadian forces.
Mr. Speaker, the sad fact is Conservatives spend hundreds of millions of dollars on war and yet fail to provide basic services for our soldiers when they come home injured. Reservists like those in Thunder Bay and right across the country are now waiting 2 years or more for severance pay, and there's a backlog of over 2,700 and growing. It's simply unacceptable. We welcome the new minister, but when will the new Minister of Defence fix this mess and finally give Canadian Forces reservists the support they need and the support they deserve?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
I thank the member for his question, although I gather he didn't hear my first answer, which is that from the beginning of this month, my department directed people to process the back payment for reservists. That backlog, I agree, is unacceptable, and it must be dealt with expeditiously. But, Mr. Speaker, when he says that this government spends money on war, in fact, what we spend money on through the Canadian Armed Forces is protecting the security and the interests of this country. And we are doing exactly that in Iraq. And, Mr. Speaker, that is what the men and women in uniform sign up for. They sign up to fight for this country and defend its interests and defend its security.
Member for Sackville Eastern
Mr. Speaker, in the House of Commons, the Prime Minister stated that when it came cuts to DVA, that only backroom jobs are being cut. But just recently, Mr. Speaker, 44 frontline jobs have been cut in order to transfer that work over to backroom private service insurance companies in order to deal with insurance benefit claims for veterans. Now we find out that Medivie Blue Cross will actually cut off veterans from their benefits if they can't reach them by phone. My question to the minister is very clear. This ideology that they have regarding cutting public service jobs, transferring that work over to the private sector, will not improve benefits for veterans. In fact, it'll frustrate and delete them even more. My question to the minister again, Mr. Speaker, will he reverse his decision and bring those jobs back to the public service?
The Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, as that member well knows, these jobs don't need to be brought back because there were no cuts, Mr. Speaker. The employees at issue were reassigned to frontline jobs at Veterans Affairs Canada. Their salaries were maintained, and there were no moves involved, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the changes to the Treatment Authorization Centre recognize the increased number of service providers across the country, and these changes should bring processing times down, Mr. Speaker. That's something I think the member would agree is a priority for our veterans.
Honourable Member for Elmwood Transcona.
Mr. Speaker, pro-Russian forces have blatantly violated the ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs please update the House on the government's response to this ongoing Russian military aggression against sovereign Ukrainian territory?
Canadians need to know this.
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The violation of the agreed-upon ceasefire is completely unacceptable, and for that reason,
Today, I am prepared to announce that we will increase the number of sanctions against prominent Russian individuals and entities. Details will be released in the coming days, but Canada has already sanctioned over 210 individuals and entities. I'm proud to say we have the toughest sanction regime in the world here in Canada. Now, this conflict will only end when Russia halts its invasion, and we will continue to stand with the people of Ukraine as we always have.
Honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Canada's forestry industry provides good middle-class jobs in communities across this country, but Conservatives have failed it. Dozens of sawmills have closed, throwing thousands out of work. Now Conservatives are embroiled in another trade dispute, this time with China over pulp, that will further damage this important sector. Mr. Speaker, government should resolve issues with major trade partners before they erupt into disputes that hurt businesses and throw workers out of their jobs. Why did the minister fail to sort this issue out before it became a full-blown trade dispute?
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as that member knows, this government has taken this issue to the World Trade Organization, where we will be pursuing Canadian interests, standing up for our industry. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, there's no government that has done more for the forestry industry than this Conservative government.
The Honourable Member for Argenteuil-Papineau-Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, China has imposed unfair discriminatory duties on dissolving pulp. And despite the significant investments by the company, the layoffs keep coming in Thurso. Despite the fact that the Conservatives filed a complaint with the WTO, the case has dragged on for years and there's no end in sight. What is the minister going to do to correct this situation and reassure workers affected?
This government took the step of taking this issue, this dispute, to the World Trade Organization, where we believe we will prevail. Mr. Speaker, this government stands up for the dissolving pulp industry as it does for the forest industry more broadly. And I will repeat again, there's no government that has done more for the forestry industry than this Conservative government.
Honourable Member for Scarborough, Rouge River.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister told a private radio station that, and I quote, a lot of Radio-Canada employees hate Conservative values. Recently, his spokesman also wrote that it was difficult for him not to conclude that his, and I quote, worst suspicions about Radio-Canada had come true. Mr. Speaker, we've seen in the past what happens to those who don't agree with Conservative politics. Why does the Prime Minister believe that CBC employees have to stick to Conservative values?
The Honourable Minister of
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister gave that interview, he was talking about people in Quebec. I travel all around Quebec frequently, and I can tell you what Quebecers want. They want more money in their pockets to meet their families' needs. They want sound fiscal management and balanced budgets. The time is over for soft sentences on criminals. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Pierre Boucher. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister said that Radio-Canada employees hate the Conservatives. He'd probably prefer to turn our public broadcaster into a Conservative Party propaganda machine, but his statement is reminiscent of the Defence Minister's claim that our public broadcaster lies all the time, and the Prime Minister's press secretary's admission that he had suspicions about Radio-Canada. How can the minister claim that the dismantling of Radio-Canada has nothing to do with her government's contempt for our public broadcaster? The Honourable Minister. That is false, Mr. Speaker. Radio-Canada gets over $1.1 billion a year from the government to do its work, so that's false. What the Prime Minister was saying is that what Quebecers want is lower taxes, support for families, a fight on against jihadis, no more soft sentences for criminals, putting victims ahead of criminals. They voted against all that, but we will defend Quebec.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives refused for 4 months to provide Canadians any information at all about the cost of the Iraq mission. So I asked the Parliamentary Budget Officer for help. According to the PBO, they then illegally, and I'll quote, refused all PBO requests for specific data on this mission. Yesterday, the minister added insult to this secrecy and deception by slapping down a single cost number, no detail, no analysis, just an end run of the PBO's report released today. Does the minister not believe Canadians have the right to be respected and to have real cost information on this important mission?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
An important mission that the Liberal Party opposes, Mr. Speaker. You know, this government committed from the beginning that we would release the costs in the appropriate and normal parliamentary method, which we have done. It will be tabled this week as part of the Supplementary Estimate C. $122 million is incremental costs associated with Operation Impact. The real issue is why the Liberal Party has turned its back on decades of responsible internationalism, a party that used to stand for national security, now standing against our efforts to protect Canadians in opposing the genocidal terrorist organization ISIL. We are proud of what our men and women in our uniform are doing to combat that organization.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Laurent-Cartierville. Mr. Speaker, my question's for the Minister responsible for official languages, if there even is one in this government. Will the Minister see to it that her colleagues set a good example and fulfill their obligation to communicate with the public in both official languages, including emails? To help the Minister do her job, here's the list of ministers who are not respecting bilingualism in their communications. The President of the Treasury Board, the Government House Leader, the Ministers of Finance, Industry, International Trade, Citizenship and Immigration, the Environment, Health, Transport, Fisheries and Oceans, Labour and the Status of Women, Veterans, National Revenue, and more. The Honourable Minister responsible for official languages. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what the member opposite just said is ridiculous. The government regularly communicates in both official languages. He's talking about Twitter tweets, and those tweets are personal accounts, those Twitter accounts. We take both official languages very seriously, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Montmagny. In the wake of the coroner's report on the tragic fire at L'Île Verte, the Quebec government announced that sprinklers would have to be installed in almost all seniors' homes. Since CMHC is involved in the construction and renovation of housing for seniors in need of assistance, can the Minister of Employment and Social Development tell us if he has read the report yet and what steps will be taken to help the owners of seniors' homes afford to install sprinklers? We're talking about the most vulnerable seniors in society, Mr. Speaker, and a relevant answer would be highly appreciated. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the provinces and the territories have their choice of construction code, and they're responsible for seeing to it that construction is up to standard according to their respective codes.
The Conservatives voted to support an NDP motion to compensate thalidomide victims. They promised swift action. Now, months later, as deadlines pass, survivors fear the Conservatives are going to break their promise. Recently, the spokesperson for the Thalidomide Victims Association said, and I quote, "Members are starting to fear it was all a facade." Mr. Speaker, thalidomide survivors have waited long enough. Will the minister today set a concrete date for delivering financial relief?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I met with Mercedes, the head of the Thalidomide Survivors Association, just last week again, and I reassured her and I confirmed to her that there will be compensation for the survivors, and we are working very hard to deliver that soon. Mr. Speaker, she knows very clearly that she has my commitment and that we will be there to support them in the long term.
The Honourable Member for Prince Edward Hastings.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before Bill C-31, CRA officials were inexplicably prohibited from passing along evidence of serious criminal activity uncovered on the job two relevant law enforcement agencies. So clearly, this was and is unacceptable. Can the Minister of National Revenue today please explain to this House why this change was necessary and how it is consistent with our government's commitment to protecting Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of National
Thank the member for Prince Edward Hastings for that question. There have been occasions when CRA officials, in the course of their ordinary duties, have uncovered evidence of drug trafficking, terrorism, child pornography, even contracts for the commission of murder, and have been restricted from conveying this information to law enforcement. When CRA officials uncover such evidence of serious criminal activity, they should be able to share it with law enforcement. I think that's what everyone expects, and certainly thanks to our government that will now be the case. Mr. Speaker, I find it shocking that both the Liberals and NDP voted against this.
For Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, despite its superhuman efforts, Nova Scotia's Acadian community can no longer do more with less. They've reached the breaking point. Why is the Heritage Minister turning her back on this community? She herself acknowledged the exemplary management of the Acadian Federation. Can the Minister at least commit to increase funding to better support the Acadian community of Nova Scotia?
Of Canadian heritage.
As I've repeatedly said, Mr. Speaker, we are very serious about official languages and minority communities. That is why we have a record of $1.1 billion in investments. That's a record level. We're going to continue along those lines. We're going to continue supporting our Francophone minority communities in Canada. The Honourable Member for Rimouski. Mr. Speaker, the National Energy Board's disrespect for French on the Energy East file is unacceptable. Last November, the NDP filed a complaint with the Commissioner of Official Languages. A lot of the 30,000 pages in documents are not available in French, even though much of the path of the pipeline will go through Quebec. Owners, landowners, and municipalities feel like they're being ignored. Does the minister find the NEB's disdain for Francophones acceptable? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The National Energy Board has fulfilled its requirements under the Official Languages Act. Any documents produced by the National Energy Board must be published in both official languages. Questions related to documents filed by the applicant should be directed toward the project proponent.
That's great. The member for Don Valley East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government understands that Canadian families know best how to spend their money. This is a fundamental difference between our party and the Liberals and NDP. That's why our government has taken real action to reduce taxes on Canadian families, including family tax cut and the enhanced universal childcare benefit. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of State for Social Development please update this House on our government's initiatives to put more money in the pockets of Canadian families?
The Honourable Minister of State for Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member from Don Valley East for the good work that he's doing to support families in this riding. Mr. Speaker, our government is in a position we're fulfilling our promise to balance the federal budget. We're in a position to now help families balance their own budgets. So they're getting ready, Mr. Speaker, to file their taxes, and almost 2 million families will benefit as they file their income taxes for 2014 from our family tax cut. Mr. Speaker, they're also going to benefit from our expansion to the universal childcare benefit. We are making sure that more money is in the pockets of Canadian families. The Liberals and the NDP would reverse that tax cut.
The Honourable Member for Bar-Richelieu, Nicolette Bécancourt. Mr. Speaker, unlike the NDP and the BQ, there's no ambivalence about the Trans-Canada Pipeline proposal. The Quebec National Assembly, as a matter of fact, has already passed a unanimous resolution recognizing its environmental jurisdiction. To us, the environmental issues in connection with this pipeline are of fundamental importance. All of the Federalist parties in Ottawa have got to understand that Quebec has the power to decide what happens in Quebec. It's Quebec's land, Quebec takes all the risk, so it's for Quebec and its regions to decide. Will the government undertake to respect Quebec's environmental process and the choices Quebecers make? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, we have been clear. We do not take positions on specific applications for energy infrastructure until an independent review is complete. Our government relies on the Independent National Energy Board for decisions related to proposals of energy infrastructure, including TransCanada's Energy East proposal. We look forward to receiving the result of their rigorous, thorough, and independent review. And our government has been clear. Proposals will only be approved if they are safe for Canadians and safe for the environment.
Member for Shannon-Scope Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've asked the Minister for Public Safety this question. I've asked the Minister for Justice. I'd like the Prime Minister perhaps to give me an actual answer. Under Bill C-51, the new secret police powers are broad and extensive, but have been said to limit those areas of lawful protest and advocacy. My question is about those activities that are by definition not lawful, but are peaceful, such as when Conservative MPs refuse to fill out the long gun registry, or when Green Party members blockade Kinder Morgan pipelines. Will non-violent, peaceful activities be exempted from this act?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's very well known the Anti-Terrorism Act 2015 is designed to deal with the promotion and actual execution of terrorist activities and not other lawful activities.
That concludes the question period for today. Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Orders of the day, government orders, government bills and comments. Consideration at report stage of Bill C-12, Drug-Free Prisons Act.
Il y a une motion d'amendement inscrite.
There is one motion of amendment on the order paper as concerns report stage of Bill C-12.
Will not be proceeding with her motion. Consequently, there will be no motions at report stage. And the House will now proceed without debate to the putting of the question on the motion to concur in the bill at report stage. Mr. Blaney, seconded by Mr. Duncan, Vancouver Island North, moves that Bill C-12, an act to amend the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, be concurred in at report stage. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed? Agreed. I declare the motion carried. When shall the bill be read a third time? Right now? Right now. Monsieur Blaney, appuyé par Monsieur Duncan.
Mr. Blaney, seconded by Mr. Duncan, Vancouver Island North, moves that Bill C-12, an act to amend the Correctional Officers Act, be now ready third time and adopted.
Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak this afternoon to Bill C-12, an act that seeks to eradicate drugs from our federal penitentiary. Mr. Speaker, at the outset, I would like to thank the Standing Committee on Public Safety to have studied and adopted this legislative measure. It is a measure that is very important in the fight against the consumption and presence of illegal drugs in our federal penitentiaries and to